The streets of Albany, Georgia, were quiet that night. The kind of stillness you'd expect in the early hours, when most people are asleep and the world seems to hold its breath. But for 24-year-old Serenity Hollis, it was simply another walk home. A routine moment, an ordinary night that should have ended like any other. Serenity, a young black trans woman, carried herself with the kind of resilience you only learn after facing battles most people never see. She had survived violence before. She had chosen to live her truth, no matter the risk. And even in a world that often denied her dignity, Serenity refused to be invisible. But on May 8th, 2021, that resilience met something colder, more unforgiving. As Serenity made her way down West Highland Avenue, she had no idea that a shadow followed her footsteps. From behind, a figure raised a gun, an act of cowardice, an act of hate, and with a single shot to the back of her head, Serenity's life was stolen in an instant. The silence of that street was shattered. The kind of violence that doesn't just claim a life, but leaves a family torn, a community shaken, and a nation confronted once again with an uncomfortable truth. Being black, being trans, and being visible can still cost you everything. What makes this story even more haunting is not only the way Serenity died, but the way she was treated after her death. Police reports misgendered her. News outlets repeated her dead name. Even in death, Serenity was stripped of the very identity she fought so hard to live openly. The violence didn't end with a bullet. It continued in the erasure of her truth. Her mother, Robin, described her as a beautiful soul taken too soon. Her sister, Shannon, believes her murder was no accident, calling it either revenge or a hate crime. Their voices, filled with grief, echo the pain of too many families who buried their loved ones for simply existing. Serenity's story is not an isolated tragedy. She was a 25th trans or gender non-conforming person murdered in the U.S. in 2021 alone. Most of them were black trans women. Most of them, like Serenity, were killed with a gun. These are not random coincidences. They are part of a deadly pattern woven from transphobia, racism, and silence. Tonight, we remember Serenity not just as another statistic, but as a daughter, a sister, and a human being whose life mattered. This is her story of resilience, of tragedy, and the urgent call for justice that her name now carries. Stay with us as we honor Serenity Hollis and confront the dark legacy of hate that cut her life short. Before her name became a headline, before her story became another statistic, Serenity Hollis was simply Serenity. To those who loved her, she was laughter in the room, a voice that carried warmth, and a presence that brought comfort even in hard times. Born and raised in Albany, Georgia, Serenity grew up in a family that loved her deeply. Her mother, Robin, often said that Serenity had a beautiful soul, a phrase that captured not just her daughter's outward charm, but the kindness she carried inside. Serenity's life was not without challenges. Like many young black trans women in the South, she faced moments of rejection and misunderstanding. But through it all, she pushed forward with quiet strength. She lived authentically, even when the world around her tried to make that impossible. Her sister, Shannon, remembered her as loyal and full of love. She was one of those people you could always count on, she said. Whether it was a word of encouragement, a shared laugh, or simply her presence, Serenity had a way of making those around her feel seen. To her friends, Serenity was vibrant and alive, a young woman still exploring her dreams, still shaping her future. She loved fashion, enjoyed expressing herself through her style, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who knew the value of being true to herself. Though the world sometimes refused to honor her identity, Serenity never wavered in honoring herself. She embodied resilience, not just in her survival, but in her joy. To live as a black trans woman in America is itself an act of courage, and Serenity lived with that courage every single day. That's why her loss was felt so deeply. It was a quiet Sunday morning in Albany, Georgia, when the world around Serenity Hollis changed forever. The streets were still, the day just beginning to unfold. But within moments, a life filled with love and possibility was cut short in a burst of violence that no one could have imagined. Serenity was walking along Albany's busy roadway when tragedy struck. In what should have been just another ordinary morning, she was suddenly targeted. Shots rang out, shattering the calm and echoing through the neighborhood. In seconds, her life was stolen, leaving behind grief, questions, and heartbreak. Neighbors who heard the gunfire would later describe the scene as surreal. The stillness that followed was heavy, almost unbearable for those nearby. The realization that someone so young, so full of life, had been taken was a shock they would never forget. Police were called to the scene, and what they found was devastating. Serenity, only 24 years old, lay fatally wounded. For officers and first responders, it was another crime scene, but for her family and community, it was a loss of someone irreplaceable, a daughter, a sister, a friend. News of her death spread quickly, hitting those who knew her with unbearable weight. Her family rushed to the site, overcome with disbelief. The grief of her mother, Robin, was indescribable. She had already lost one child to gun violence just months before, and now she faced the unimaginable pain of losing Serenity as well. For her friends, the day became a blur of tears and unanswered questions. How could this happen? Why Serenity? And why did violence seem to find her family again and again? It was a cruel reality that left everyone reeling, struggling to make sense of a senseless act. Though details of the shooting would emerge in the days that followed, in that moment, all that remained was grief. The silence after the gunshot spoke louder than any words. Serenity's life, her dreams, her laughter, all were taken in a heartbeat. What was left behind was not only a family mourning, but also a community forced to confront the devastating impact of violence against Black trans women. Serenity's death was not just a personal tragedy. It became another painful reminder of how society too often fails to protect the most vulnerable. The investigation into Serenity Hollis's death began almost immediately as detectives and officers scoured the area for evidence. Yellow police tape lined the street where she was found, and investigators carefully marked shell casings that littered the ground. Forensic teams worked methodically, knowing that each small detail could be the key to unraveling who was responsible for cutting her life short. At first, the details were scarce. Witnesses were shaken, some hesitant to speak, while others bravely stepped forward to recount what they saw or heard that morning. Detectives knew they were racing against time. In a case like this, the longer answers remained hidden, the harder it would be to bring justice. For Serenity's family, the legal process felt agonizingly slow. They wanted answers immediately, someone to tell them why, someone to tell them who. But the wheels of justice turned carefully, and investigators had to build their case step by step, making sure every piece of evidence could stand in court. As days turned to weeks, police confirmed that Serenity's killing had not been random. This was not an accident, not a stray bullet in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was deliberate. That knowledge deepened the pain, because it meant Serenity was targeted. It meant someone chose to take her life away. The case took on an added weight, because Serenity was a Black trans woman. Advocates and community members worried whether her identity would be taken seriously in the eyes of the law, as too often violence against trans people is minimized or dismissed. Activists pushed for accountability, demanding that the investigation treat Serenity's murder with the urgency it deserved. Eventually, police identified a suspect and pursued charges. This step brought a small measure of relief to the community, but it did little to ease the sorrow her family carried. For her mother, Robin, justice in the courtroom could never replace the warmth of her daughter's presence. Legal proceedings moved forward, each hearing reopening wounds for those closest to Serenity. The courtroom became a place of both hope and heartache, where the family had to relive the trauma again and again, all while waiting for a verdict that could never bring Serenity back. The investigation and legal process became not just about one case, but a reflection of something bigger. Whether the system could show that the lives of Black trans women mattered, that their deaths would not be brushed aside, and that justice, though imperfect, could still be pursued with dignity and determination. When Serenity's mother, Robin, first heard the news, it felt like her entire world had been shattered. She described her daughter as her best friend, someone she could laugh with, cry with, and lean on when life became overwhelming. Losing Serenity was more than a loss of a daughter. It was a loss of companion, a partner in love and survival. In interviews, Robin's voice often cracked, carrying both immense pride in who Serenity was and unimaginable grief at how she was taken. Friends and family painted a picture of Serenity as a radiant soul who made people feel welcomed. She was someone who could light up a room with her smile and quick wit. Her loved ones remembered her not only for her style and beauty, but for the kindness she carried in her heart. To them, Serenity was not just another victim, not just another headline. She was a full person whose dreams and laughter had been stolen. The grief spread outward, touching everyone who had been close to her. Childhood friends recalled playing together, talking about their futures, and supporting each other through life's challenges. They expressed disbelief that someone so full of life could be gone in an instant. Her story cut short in such a violent way. Advocacy groups quickly stepped forward, knowing Serenity's death was not an isolated tragedy. Organizations dedicated to supporting LGBTQ+ communities spoke out, pointing to a pattern of violence faced by Black trans women across the country. They reminded the public that Serenity was the 25th trans person killed in the United States in 2021 alone, a chilling number that underscored how systemic this violence truly is. At vigils and rallies, candles flickered in Serenity's memory. People gathered to chant her name, to honor her existence, and to demand change. These moments weren't just about mourning. They were about resistance, about refusing to let Serenity's story fade into silence. Her life became a rallying point, a symbol for a larger fight to protect those most vulnerable. For her mother, though, advocacy was personal. Robin spoke openly about the need for love, acceptance, and accountability. She wanted the world to know that Serenity was deeply loved, that she mattered. Each word she spoke carried the weight of a grieving mother's heart, but also the courage of someone determined to turn pain into purpose. Journalists and community leaders echoed these sentiments, calling attention to the gaps in safety, protection, and recognition for trans people, especially trans women of color. They emphasized that Serenity's death should not be remembered as just another statistic, but as a story that demanded change in how society treats its most marginalized members. In the end, the voices of family and advocacy groups blended into a chorus of love and defiance. They told Serenity's story not only as a way of grieving, but also as a way of ensuring that her life, her joy, and her struggles would inspire a collective push toward justice, awareness, and compassion. When we pause to think about Serenity Hollis' story, it becomes clear that her death was not just a random act of violence. It was part of a much larger pattern. Across the country, Black trans women face disproportionate levels of danger, living at the intersection of racism, transphobia, and misogyny. Serenity's life and her tragic loss remind us that behind every statistic is a person with dreams, hopes, and people who love them. Her story echoes the voices of many others who have been silenced too soon. It calls us to recognize that violence against trans people is not an isolated issue, but one rooted in deep societal prejudices. When trans women are mocked, ignored, or stripped of dignity, it creates an environment where violence feels permissible. Serenity's case forces us to confront how culture, law, and everyday interactions either protect people or fail them completely. At the heart of this reflection is a simple truth. Every person deserves the right to live authentically and safely. Serenity lived bravely as herself, embracing her identity despite the challenges she knew she might face. Her courage highlights what it means to live fully, but also exposes a cruel reality that authenticity, for many, comes at a dangerous cost. The role of family acceptance cannot be overstated. Serenity was fortunate to have her mother's unwavering love, but too many trans youth are not so lucky. Rejection can push young people into homelessness, isolation, or unsafe situations. Serenity's story, while tragic, also shines a light on the powerful impact of acceptance, how one mother's love created a safe space for her daughter, even as the outside world remained threatening. Broader social reflections also demand we look at systemic failures. Were there protections in place for people like Serenity? Were resources available to help keep her and others safe? These questions extend far beyond one community. They force us to grapple with gaps in policy, policing, healthcare, and education that leave trans people especially vulnerable. We also cannot ignore the media's role. Too often, trans victims are misgendered, dead-named, or reduced to sensational headlines. Serenity's death challenges us to demand more accurate, respectful reporting that honors the whole person. It pushes us to see victims as more than just the violence that took their lives, but as individuals who had rich stories worth telling. Her loss sparks a reflection on how communities can come together to change the culture. Education about gender identity, advocacy for stronger protections, and everyday acts of kindness toward marginalized people can all be part of building a safer, more inclusive society. Serenity's story can serve as a guidepost, reminding us of what's at stake and what still needs to be done. In the end, the broader theme is not just tragedy, but responsibility. Serenity's life was cut short, but it calls us to live differently, to be more compassionate, more aware, and more willing to stand up for justice. As we reflect on Serenity Hollis' story, we are left with a question that lingers in the heart. What can be done to ensure that tragedies like hers do not keep repeating? Her life was precious, full of dreams and possibilities. And though it was stolen far too soon, her memory can become a catalyst for change. It begins with each of us choosing not to turn away, but instead to lean in and take action. One of the most immediate ways to honor Serenity's memory is by supporting local and national advocacy groups that work tirelessly for the safety and rights of transgender people. Organizations like the Human Rights Campaign and smaller grassroots groups provide resources, legal aid, and safe spaces for those who need it most. Donating, volunteering, or simply amplifying their work can create ripples of change that extend far beyond what we may imagine. Community support also begins at home, in neighborhoods, schools, and workplaces. Imagine the difference if every classroom taught respect for all identities, or if every workplace truly welcomed diversity without fear of discrimination. Serenity's story is a reminder that creating safer environments isn't just the job of lawmakers or activists. It's the responsibility of each person who believes in dignity and equality. For families, Serenity's journey highlights the importance of love and acceptance. Her mother's unwavering support gave her the strength to live authentically. If you are a parent, sibling, or friend, your acceptance could be the difference between despair and hope for someone you love. Family support has the power to shield, to uplift, and to save lives. Serenity's story shows us the profound impact that love can have. But beyond love and support, action is needed on a broader scale. We must push for stronger protections against hate crimes, better mental health resources for marginalized communities, and laws that protect, not target, transgender individuals. Change doesn't come overnight, but it does come when people raise their voices, contact their representatives, and refuse to accept silence as an option. We also need to remember the importance of visibility and storytelling. Every time we say Serenity's name, we ensure she is not forgotten. Every time we share her story, we shed light on the realities faced by Black trans women across the country. It's through these stories that empathy grows, that communities awaken, and that hearts begin to shift toward justice. Community vigils, marches, and memorials are also powerful ways of coming together. These moments of collective mourning are not just about grief. They are about reclaiming space, demanding safety, and showing the world that trans lives matter. They remind us that even in the darkest times, people can stand together and become a force for healing and change. And finally, as we close this chapter, remember that action starts small. It can be as simple as correcting someone when they misgender a person, offering support to a struggling friend, or educate yourself and others about the challenges trans people face. Serenity's story is heavy with loss, but it also carries a spark of hope. The hope that by remembering her, by honoring her life, and by refusing to be silent, we can create a future where every life is valued, protected, and celebrated. As we reach the end of Serenity Hollis' story, it is impossible not to feel the weight of her absence. A daughter, a sister, a friend, she was a light to those who knew her best. The streets where she once walked now carry the silence of her loss, a silence that echoes the pain of so many families who have had to bury loved ones before their time. Yet in remembering Serenity, we are reminded that even in tragedy, love leaves behind a legacy that cannot be erased. Her story, though devastating, is not just about the violence that took her life. It is also about the courage it took for her to live authentically. Serenity embraced her identity in a world that often made it dangerous to do so. That bravery is something worth honoring. It is something worth remembering every time we speak her name. In her truth, Serenity showed us a kind of strength that cannot be dimmed by hatred or fear. Closing our eyes, we can imagine her laughter, her presence, the way she carried herself with both resilience and grace. To her family, she was not just another name in a headline, but a heartbeat in their daily lives. They loved her for who she was. And though her journey was cut short, their memories of her will forever keep her alive in spirit. This is a power of love. It outlives even the deepest wounds of violence. As we reflect on her life, we must also acknowledge the collective grief felt across communities when yet another trans woman of color becomes a victim of violence. Serenity's story is not isolated. It is part of a larger pattern, a heartbreaking reminder of the urgency for change. Her loss compels us not only to mourn but to act, to use our voices, our choices, and our compassion to create safer spaces for those who are most vulnerable. And while grief often feels like an ending, it can also be a beginning. From Serenity's story, a call emerges, a call to empathy, to justice, to standing alongside those whose lives are constantly at risk. Every person who hears her name has a choice: to let her memory fade into statistics, or to carry it forward as a reason to fight for a better tomorrow. Perhaps the most important reflection is this: Serenity deserved more. She deserved to chase her dreams, to grow old, to find joy in the simple moments of life. Remembering that truth keeps us grounded in what is at stake. This is not just about policy or awareness. It is about human lives, about ensuring that no more families are torn apart by senseless acts of hate. Her story challenges us to look inward, too. How do we treat others? Do we speak up when we see injustice? Do we extend kindness to people who live differently from us? Serenity's memory becomes a mirror, asking us not only to feel sorrow for what was lost, but to commit to building something better in her honor. So as we close this chapter, let us carry Serenity's name with us, not as a story of tragedy alone, but as a symbol of resilience, love, and the unshakable truth that every life has value. May her spirit inspire us to stand stronger, love harder, and refuse to remain silent in the face of hate. Serenity Hollis may be gone, but her story will continue to live, guiding us toward a future where every life is embraced and celebrated.